led by Vice President, in this case Vice President Biden, an Amtrak rider, the new Secretary of Transportation, the mayor, and the governor. And that forms a task force, and the first thing that they need to do is secure the relocation of Madison Square Garden to the Morgan Postal Facility. Secondly, they need to build the Gateway project, which includes this new tunnel under the Hudson that has already been proposed and studies have been done for, which includes the funding for this new station at the new Penn Station location. Provide a series of amenities. We do this as a city. We provide amenities, we provide public action like parks and transit, and that spurs private development. And that is precisely what we're saying here, and we would create a TDR, a Transfer of Development Rights District, as well as a tax increment financing district that would help pay for all of this. And finally, because we're not allergic to numbers at SHOP, we actually truly believe that we figured out how to do this without a public contribution. Now that seems extraordinary to think about all of this infrastructure, this entire train station. It's not without public risk. It means floating bonds, right, and having those bonds paid back over time. But what we've unearthed is that there is tremendous value in the station retail, signage, and also the potential for a district TIF, a tax increment financing mechanism, which we believe could pay for this because there's some 23 million square feet of development that this throws off. We used a number, this $9.10, that's about 2/3 of a standard tax rate for an office building in this part of town. We believe just by using those 2/3, we can finance most of this infrastructure, and that includes some very conservative assumptions, including a 30% budget overrun in terms of what could happen on a large-scale project like this. So we just wanted to close with one fun drawing that I think the team is gonna. And this is the core team that worked on this: Dana Getman, senior designer, Omar Toravaca, Ryan Lovett, as well as about 25 other people that are in the back room.
Pull it tight.
Thank you very much. I think we're distributing a couple of drawings if you want to get some. Thank you.
Thank you again to those four firms. Thank you. I'd like to welcome Michael Kimmelman to the stage, New York Times architecture critic, who will be our moderator. We'll do a very fast reload here. Out and in. Then if I could ask our panelists to join me here on the walkway. Anyone standing in the back, there are a few seats down in the front. We welcome you down here. Michael Kimmelman, go ahead, Michael.
Thanks.
Dillis Scofidio and Renfro. Roger, SOM. John.
Hey.
We're having a sock off.
This is shop green.
So thanks. I'm sure you all have lots of questions. So we'll talk for a while and then make sure to leave room. I realize that a number of you, like me, are journalists here, and thanks to Liz, we now know with the drifting vendors what jobs lie ahead of us since our industry has collapsed. So that's one future vision, which is nice to know. So let me start with a few basic questions. I think one of the things that's important to say, and I think all of you, these were incredibly interesting and provocative and wonderful to see. I think what was very interesting from all of you, and it needs to be said publicly, is that this is not about Madison Square Garden versus Penn Station. I mean, I think for the city, and the city includes the owners of the garden and its many fans, it's important that whatever happens here also benefits them. And I mean, I'm making a statement about this, but I think all of you would agree that it's very important as an integral component of whatever changes there, that the garden benefit as well. Yes? But one of the things I don't know that came across as clearly as perhaps it needs to, just to lay out something very quickly at the start, is why is the garden in the way? Can you explain for people, somebody here, Vishan or someone, exactly what is it about the garden that structurally prevents the improvement of Penn Station? And not just, by the way, not just light and air, not something that some people may think would be nice, but is unfortunate, but some fundamental problems. You brought up issues of safety, and I think capacity is very crucial. You all addressed it.
Well, fundamentally, I mean, I think we all know the history of what happened in 1963, but the arena is structured as 20,000 as a 20,000 seat venue. It has a span across the top, which results in very, very big columns that support the drum. Those columns have to obviously come to ground, and they come to ground right in those pictures we showed. They come right to ground on the platforms. Right. This is a perilous situation because the fact is Penn Station can't move. Those tracks and platforms are there, you know, for as long as this is a city, right? The garden can, and the issue is that you can't clear up all of that infrastructure, all the muck and mire you go through when you get off the train, right? In addition to not being able to find light and air and all of that stuff, that the two programs simply don't function well on top of each other. On top of that, at the street level, you have, and we know from our experience at the Barclays Center, you have an extraordinary array of trucks and buses and all sorts of things that have to come in and out of a functioning arena. At the same time, you've got hundreds of thousands of people trying to use a train station who can't find the train station. You can stand there for 5 minutes and someone will say, you know where Penn Station is? I mean, they're standing right there because they can't find the entrance.
Yeah. Does somebody want to add something to this?
Well, I guess I'd just like to, exactly what Vishan's saying about, the structure. But we had huge arguments about this in the office as to, how could you get all these things to go? And I think James in our office said, it's like 3 fat guys in a boat, a rowboat. It's not very attractive if they're all just sort of filling up the entire space. And New York is, a lot of people say,
to a cruise ship.
Right, well, cruise ship. But New York,
We're drifting, sorry.
should be. We always talk about New York having a culture of congestion, that it's great that if you get all these things together and they mix and there's something great out of it. But I'd flip it around. New York is great because of the culture of concentration. And if the uses are adequate and have enough space around it, why not give each one of the fat guys its own boat and allow them to fish in a way that gets the most fish instead of having them up on top of each other trying to cast their line?
I mean, for us, I think we agree that it's actually the right area. I mean, within the block or two of those train lines, but in fact, its design is jeopardized. It doesn't have entrances that are recognizable. By moving it, it has its own identity. It could be architectural as well as access, including stage access, which is completely jeopardized in its current form. So it's an opportunity, an architectural opportunity as well. And we can't underplay the fact that Madison Square Garden, sitting on top of Penn Station, impairs the quality of the space underneath it.
Yeah, I mean, do you want to add something to this as well, or you're okay with this?
I would just like to say that we consider the station, Madison Square Garden, an impediment.
Yeah.
And the protagonist here is to create a wonderful world-class transportation facility. And the station itself is not great. So, the garden aside, and we think that pragmatically speaking, the blocks to the south are very important to create some kind of phasing initiative that would allow to decant the station, demolish it, and rebuild it.
Yeah.
So
I mean, the,
that kind of idea.
you know, a number of you touched upon, quite apart from the traveling vendors, so the kinds of things that will be changing over time in incredibly interesting ways. But I mean, and Vishen, you've talked about this as well. You know, we're going to have probably fewer cars. We're going to have more bikes, probably. We're going to have a different kind of city. We're going to have increasing capacity probably for trains. You know, very articulately described a vision in the 1960s, which seems completely antithetical now to the way that most people are thinking about the city and its future. So obviously one of the things that needs to be done is to create a station that looks ahead. And all of you seem to feel that that this area could be a center of a new enormous development, mixed-use development. But I think people out here would also say, well, you know, that's dependent upon a lot of hope, the development of an enormous amount of stuff happening at Hudson Yards and elsewhere. And we've been down some of this road before. We've been down the road of talking to Madison Square Garden, for instance, about moving into the back of the Farley Post Office. So there's a two-part question, which I'd like you to answer. One is, we tried it before, it didn't work. Why should this be any different? And then secondly, if you could talk more about what kind of a future you really do practically envision on the west side. It's easy to say we would build these buildings and there will be all this stuff, but I mean, so the first part is, what happened in 2007 that failed, and how can we learn from that this time?
Yes,
sure.
You're the one.
Let me reverse this question a little bit. On the precedent issue in terms of the public sector taking the risk of building the infrastructure and having the development come. Well, we have this place called Grand Central, where that seemed to work out pretty well. We have this thing called the High Line, where that seemed to work out pretty well. We have plenty of precedent in this city for when the public does the right thing and invests in the right thing, that we get the kind of growth and development that we want to see around it. That helps, by the way, pay for all. On this and what happened in 2007 is, look, at a personal level, I'm on governor number 4 with Penn Station. And the governor who got it the most was Governor Spitzer. The problem is he was getting other things as well. And that led really to the collapse of the 2007 deal. We were very, very close. And the Garden was working in good faith and had every interest in moving into the back of the Farley Building. Now, the Farley Building has a couple of problems. There's a landmarks community in this city that cares very much about whether there are Budweiser signs inside of a McKinney White building. We have to figure out how to rank such priorities, but I think, it was a legitimate concern. But one of the things we talked about in that slide in terms of the Morgan Postal site is it is sitting there as an assembled site that can fit all of this, not just in terms of the arena, but in terms of all of that FAR that's floating above them, that they're dying to figure out a way to create value from. And along with the issues Greg raised about loading and so forth, it really requires governmental leadership to make that happen, to make the deal with the post office, to create the transfer district, and to move the Garden. That, to me, it seems like is the fundamental first step. We do bigger things in this city. The city can pull this off.
I mean, it's obviously, this site notoriously is an alphabet soup of different agencies and government agencies and private and rail. I mean, it's the most complicated site you can imagine with all the different interests. So again, you come back to a governance question. You need to have somehow somebody in charge on a federal level, or you were suggesting the vice president or something, but essentially you need some governing body, yeah? Do we agree with this?
Yeah, no, and I just want to go back to your last question, because I think one of the differences in 2008, we had just started a recession. People were nervous to make any changes. Since then, we've had the World Trade Center site reopened. We've had the High Line completed. Lincoln Center has been completed. We've got many projects that are complex, complicated, and required collaboration and agreement between many different agencies. There are models that are in place that would allow us to think differently about.
You interestingly left out Barclays.
And Barclays,
Which
sorry.
no, but I mean, my suspicion is it was, no. I actually didn't say it for that reason, but I said it for the obvious reason that my suspicion is that in 2007, the Garden may not have anticipated
True that.
what it would have happened.
Very
And
good
now
point.
it's possible to see more clearly the effect of Barclays, both as you're talking about in terms of its practical things and also just its success.
Sure.
So, yeah.
But back to your question, I do think the person who put this on the radar screen was Moynihan, Senator Moynihan, and he was the drum major, the catalyst for momentum in this area.
Yeah, but I agree with this, although I do have to say, it was partly when I came back from Berlin asking a couple of questions that led me myself to be curious about Penn Station, and one of the things I think happened was in an attempt to galvanize people about the catastrophe of Penn Station and to create an energy for transforming the Farley Post Office into something else. There was a kind of fudging of the limits of Farley, of what was going to happen there, that I think has actually been a hindrance to change, because I think most people, and we saw Vin even speak about it at the beginning, still people come up to me every day to say, I don't get it. I thought Farley was the solution. I thought we fixed this a while ago. There's nothing to take away from Senator Moynihan's incredibly important efforts, but I do believe that people still don't understand clearly that Farley is really a Band-Aid solution, I think somebody here said, to the larger issue.
Well, it goes back to the basic issue that we're all here to discuss. Farley made sense, Moynihan Station made sense with Penn Station as is now, with Madison Square Garden on top. If you can consider now the entire district, just as Vishana said, and about all the different pieces and parts that make up that district, a lot of other things come into play. And I think the way we approach it, and it goes back to your issue about governance, yes, a public-private partnership has to happen to make this happen. The public will has to be respected, and they have to contribute. The private development will follow. But there has to be incentives. People don't do things unless you give them a reason to do so. And whether or not it's our idea of really reestablishing 7th Avenue as the center of the city and helping development follows there, or Vishan's idea of transferring development rights further around the district, or Josh's and Roger's idea about different places in Midtown that could receive FAR and then contribute to the building of new infrastructure. All those are incentives that have to work together in a complex machine in order to get from where we are today to where we
Can we I feel like, just to be fair, we need to be a little clearer about this Farley thing. I think, because I disagree with what you just said. I don't think Farley solves the problem with the Garden sitting on top of Penn Station, because Farley ultimately accommodates, at best Amtrak, at best 25,000 passengers a day. The vast majority of people who use Penn Station still sit under what the Times called in 2008 the manhole cover of Madison Square Garden, sitting over the station. And I feel too many people for too long have let that misunderstanding slide. And when we talk about governance, the reason we put up Vice President Biden and the Transportation Secretary, and I think USDOT is very focused on this now, is that there's too much political chicanery at the local level about all this. Whether it's a state project or a city project, I mean, we still don't know where Governor Cuomo is on any of it. To my knowledge, he hasn't said a word about Moynihan Station. It would be great if he showed the kind of leadership that he showed on other issues on this. But it seems like this is big federal infrastructure. You need a strong, smart federal hand, and I think some of those smart hands exist down in Washington.
I would imagine that the governor would find this useful political
One would imagine.
Initiative, if especially it was connected to real economic development and the kinds of projects which you all have been describing, which really are multi-purpose, residential parkland, and I mean, a really transformation of an entire heart of the city. So just on a practical level, I was reminded, I mentioned I lived in Berlin, of the Hauptbahnhof there, which was built for the World Cup that came to Berlin, and which is an incredibly efficient place, which has some of the verticality and transparency that you all seem to describe, and which is easily accessible by mass transit, which becomes a place you see as you enter the city. It's a great portal to the city, though not nearly as spectacular as any of the kinds of things you were describing. I mean, this station obviously is more complex than that by a factor of 10 or 100. So all of you did seem to land on certain kinds of ideas about transparency, verticality. Maybe you could just pick up why that seems like a common solution. And by the way, you all seem to, or many of you seem to want to focus on creating an open public space, either on the site that's now the garden or adjacent to it. But that there was a real stress on creating open space there and or on top. Just
Well, in terms of the open space, Community Board 5 has some of the worst level of open space, public space in the entire city. I mean, Bryant Park, Harold and Greeley Squares, the small park near in Clinton. What else? I mean, they have Hudson River Park, fine, but this is a community of a couple 100,000 people with no open space, and we find that just incredible. So I think that's one of the reasons why we were trying to maximize as much open space as possible in the area.
Yeah, and are you talking about park space, or are you talking about transparency within the complexes we've proposed?
Well, I was asking really about two separate things. They came together in my head, but that's right. I mean, I was first talking about transparency in the use of the space, so that there was a way in which it became legible when you move through it, which obviously is exactly what Penn Station is not now.
Lacks, exactly. And I think that for us, we wanted to do something that was different than the overarching civic space of the old Penn Station. As much as we love it, it is not the kind of civic space that we feel the city needs today.
Right. I mean, thank you, because really what I was getting at and implying was none of you are rebuilding, McKinley White building. There's no attempt to sort of go back to that. You all seem to be looking for something that's much more,
engaged and urban. And for us, this site is an extension of the city. The transparency is essentially a kind of roadway, transparency of roadways. You're able to see in, you're able to see different programs as you do in the city. And yet, it has a civic scale to our mind. It needs to have a civic scale, a kind of a monumentality for the 21st century, and a transparency so that you can see where you're going. Where are the tracks? Where am I? How do I navigate this complex place of transportation?
I would just like to say that that our proposal was trying to refocus on the subject of the public realm, and there are other agendas going on. You could read into the agenda for the Hudson Yards redevelopment and say, okay, it was a blend, but I might say that the prioritization of that particular development was on upzoning commercial buildings. There's some park, there's some investment in infrastructure, but it's not the main priority of that. And the same for Midtown East, I would say. The priority is not on the public realm, it's not on an investment in transportation. So we're trying to...
You think?
Yes. So, la da, I guess, as my 14-year-old daughter might say. But we're trying to say it's about time, and it's up to us, and thank you for writing about this, and thank you to the MAS, but it's about time that we start demanding that the priorities of these developments be about the public realm. And so I think all of us, and it could happen, it can happen for sure. I mean, Vashon said earlier, the concurrent development of Grand Central, which was private, the expansion with the surrounding development, was a sort of concurrent idea, a blend. And that should be happening here. I mean, we do need a heart to Midtown West for sure.
Yeah. So so give me some other useful models for this kind of scale. I mean, I'm sure there are some people in the audience who are thinking, these guys are sitting up there and they've given us these plans, and the Second Avenue subway is moving at such a rapid pace. That's been going great. So how is this? I mean, it's a lovely morning and we get together here and this is good, but I mean, how, there seems a gap in reality. So why is this different? Why could this be different?
Well, we do. I mean, I understand what Roger's saying about Hudson Yards, but at the same time, we do have a subway line that's going to open there in the not too distant future, based on a tax increment financing program. I mean, we send about $18 billion as a city to Washington and Albany that we don't get back every year. Now, we can cry in our milk about that, right? But we're just going to have to get used to the fact that some senator from Oklahoma isn't going to authorize a huge amount of money for us to build all of this infrastructure. It's terrible, we can bemoan it, but it's just the reality of the political world that we live in, which is why we tried very hard to say, well, there's an extraordinary amount of latent value in this district. And if we can figure out a way to tap into that value, we have sufficient precedent to be able to figure out how to pay for this. It just takes the right leadership.
Yeah, I mean, so we come back to the governance issue. But you're feeling, I mean, on a practical level, you're feeling that the kinds of things that are needed here could be financed. They can either finance themselves on some level, or they would take a certain reasonable amount of public financing if there was a commitment. I mean, do we really all practically agree with this, or?
Well, I think it's essential about public financing. It's the responsibility of the government to really provide the funding for infrastructure. At its base, that's what we all contribute our taxes to. That's what we should demand the services for those taxes. What was interesting about the university, in our briefing packet, there was a University of Pennsylvania study, high-speed rail. And in that study was very interesting. They said that our airspace in the New York region is the most congested in the country. And there's no way we can fix that, because go find me 50 square miles of land where it can build a fourth airport right now, to relieve the congestion. That congestion in New York ripples throughout the country. Everywhere, every other airport, when people are screaming and waiting on the tarmac, it's because of a delay in New York, Newark or LaGuardia or JFK.
Well, it's the trains too. If you have only 2 tracks that go under the Hudson, everything's held up in the entire Northeast.
So if we had high-speed rail, we could transfer 2 million people off the airport flights onto high-speed rail. That senator in Oklahoma should be happy, because now he can have more time to get to where he's going and not have to wait, because we've made our district much better.
But I just want to add something. The reason we're sitting up here on the stage, perhaps not Vishaan, but no, I'm joking, is because we're designers, and what the wonderful thing about...
I'm sorry, what did you find that last little episode about?
Sorry. No, I'm joking, but you've worked in policy more than any of us. So what I was about to say is, we are not policy folks, we're not finance folks. We're designers, and this study is about design first. And I think that what we're trying to do today is inspire people to put design first, and also we're also collaborators. We're also collaborators, and we know how to work with our politicians and our financial folks to find solutions together.
Right. May